So looter shooters are one of my favorite and most played genres, but I don't think this genre of loot-based games is currently in the best position. A lot of the existing long-running looter shooters aren't doing too well. You have something like Warframe that's generally been doing the same over the years, but you have something like Destiny 2 that was pretty much the biggest looter shooter, not doing very well right now. You have Borderlands 4 that released this year, but pretty much had no endgame, so it has lost the vast majority of its players so far. And then you have a few other smaller looter shooters, something like Division 2 that has a much smaller community now, but there really hasn't been a big new looter shooter that is a live service game that's constantly updated with new content, which is when I think this genre is at its best. But we have gotten a very interesting looter shooter revealed not too long ago called The Cube. And while I'm calling this game a looter shooter, they do describe this as an MMORPG shooter. We don't know how MMO this is going to be. Something like Destiny 2 also calls itself an MMO when it really isn't, but the information and footage we've gotten of this game so far makes it incredibly unique and interesting. Now, one of the more interesting parts of The Cube is that it's set in the Atomic Heart universe. And Atomic Heart was a single-player first-person shooter adventure game, but it was very unique and generally pretty well received. And the studio behind Atomic Heart, Munfish, revealed Atomic Heart 2 and The Cube being a spin-off in the same universe. So that's one of the first things that makes me a bit excited for this game, because the Atomic Heart universe is very, very unique and interesting. But the second part being the namesake of this game, The Cube. Essentially what happens, and you get to see this in the trailer, a massive cube appears in the sky that is kind of rotating a bunch of its sides. And that is where this game is primarily going to take place. This massive cube in the sky that has all of these different biomes, but the cube's faces keep changing and rotating, almost like it's a Rubik's Cube, just with a lot less turning points. And that's actually going to be seen in the gameplay. This cube is actually going to be turning and changing sides and switching where biomes and areas are located while you're actually playing in the world, which is probably the most interesting part of this game. Obviously, being its namesake, this is also something that the game is kind of focused around, but it is super interesting. They also show this in the gameplay in the trailer, that this cube will be rotating and changing when you're playing on it, which is just incredibly interesting and something we haven't really seen in other games. We haven't seen this amount of kind of terrain changing during gameplay in really any other game, and it's presented in a really interesting package. And we have actually gotten a decent bit of information on this game. In fact, there's different information on the Steam page and on their official website. But let's start off with a brief description. The Cube is an MMORPG shooter, a giant levitating cube with rotating rows and edges. Hidden within is an unknown equation capable of altering the laws of reality. Can you survive another turn? And what I'm really curious about, based upon this description, is this actually going to be an MMO? A lot of games, things like Destiny and a lot of other newer MMOs, call themselves MMOs, but they just really aren't. Like something like Destiny, you can really only fight with up to like 6 other players. They don't have as many community-driven features. You can't just go to a zone together and have like 50 people fighting enemies. So I'm really curious if this is going to be a full-scale MMO, or if this is going to just be called an MMO and be more like an MMO light or a looter shooter, which is also why I'm calling it a looter shooter, because until we get further information, I'm leaning more towards it probably not being as large of a scale as a full-scale MMO. Now on the Steam page, we actually get quite a lot of information, which is a mix of lore and kind of gameplay reveals. Now, one of the really interesting parts is that reading through a lot of this, a lot of the lore is kind of making it seem like it's almost going towards an extraction shooter. They haven't said anything about this being an extraction shooter. They've described it specifically as an MMO or a multiplayer RPG shooter. None of their specific descriptions of the game have talked about it being an extraction shooter anywhere. So I'm assuming some of the stuff that makes it sound like that is probably just lore-based stuff. So under about this game, they say the Cube is a multiplayer RPG shooter. Another interesting area, sometimes they call it a multiplayer shooter, sometimes they call it an MMO. That's why I'm more leaning towards it being a looter shooter shared world type of game. So it's a multiplayer RPG shooter that blends unique world building, an intriguing narrative, and exciting quests into one game. A living world full of memorable characters, diverse biomes, and tons of enemies, including powerful bosses. Quite a lot of different things you would expect from an RPG. But then we get some more information kind of built into the lore. So first off, we have an introduction from a case file. So satellites have detected the appearance of a massive levitating structure, codenamed the Cube. Geometrically perfect, but the interior of the object is organized in an anomalous and unstable fashion. On its surface, satellites observed fragments of presumably real but distorted landscapes. Information is coming in of the Cube's central equation, the control formula that allows it to function. Decryption is in progress. Threat probability is max. So this is kind of lore elements of the Cube itself, but also kind of describing the gameplay you could expect from this massive cube constantly changing its faces and rotating. But then we get some more information of this report. So every expedition is a chance for us to advance our understanding of the object's environment. Punch cards found in areas of increased anomalous activity can be used to create or upgrade equipment for future expeditions. A training ground mini-cube simulating the cube's conditions is available during preparation. Its use is recommended but does not guarantee successful adaptation. Main vectors of development: engineering, support for life, and tactics. Any information collected will be recorded. Even unsuccessful missions are important. Progress will be saved, and that's kind of underlined. And this is one of the things that, even though a lot of this is kind of making it sound like an extraction shooter, this last part makes me think the developers put this in to tell you this isn't an extraction shooter, that these missions you're going on, even if you fail them, you kind of keep the progress, you're not losing anything. So it may be that this RPG is actually kind of built kind of like you're going into a raid or something, or a mission that you would expect from an extraction shooter, just they don't have the element of a loss that you would normally have in extraction shooters, where everything you bring in, you lose if you die. It is also interesting that directly below this, we have a GIF that was part of the trailer that shows a bunch of different weapons with tons of different attachments. So it seems that even if this isn't extraction shooter-like, it definitely seems they're taking the weapon customization inspiration from extraction shooters, like something from Escape from Tarkov. Then we have another part of this dossier under theory. So massive distortions and high levels of aggression in life forms observed at peak activity on the cube. Isolated instances of neutral or friendly contact have also been recorded. A need for coordination has arisen under these circumstances. Cooperation among seekers is the most important element to survival and progression. These are cases of individuals organizing into stable communities, provisionally referred to as clans. The consequences of a long-term interaction in a closed environment are unknown, and some groups are demonstrating deviation from protocols. So I think there's a few things they're trying to lore reveal within this. So first off, clans obviously being able to join groups and play together. Most life being aggressive here, but some instances of the life on the cube being neutral or friendly. So maybe there will be like quest givers, or maybe there will be different NPC vendors or other things, or maybe even friendly factions on the cube itself. But when they're talking about clans and some of these groups deviating from protocols, I'm assuming there's going to be some amounts of PvP. And again, this does kind of point towards this being an extraction shooter, or at least the game being developed kind of like that, even if they don't have things like losing all your equipment or having full PvP or something. But it does seem like it's going more towards that, and maybe it's still just going to be like a looter shooter like we would expect, just with possible PvP. But it could also be that these groups deviating from protocols, maybe these are NPCs, and there will be like NPC humans that have kind of gone rogue, and you have to face them on the cube as well. Then a section under the dossier is called Pattern, Atomic Heart Protocol. The appearance of the cube was detected immediately after the resolution of consequences caused by the breach at the facility, and then some of it is redacted. However, after should not be taken to mean as a result of. The chronological relationship between incidents remains unclear unproven, decryption continues on the cube's formula. So I'm assuming what this is doing is trying to tie it into the Atomic Heart games, whether this redacted stuff being stuff from Atomic Heart 1, or maybe it's stuff from Atomic Heart 2 and that's why it's redacted. And then the final part of this dossier is called Problem Statement. The cube is an unstable environment that is studying us back. It reacts to activity by scientists and seekers, reorganizes itself, and puts up resistances. Every voyage to the cube is not just a mission, but also a step deep into the unknown. Our objective is to understand what it is or who, and to do so before it begins to change us. So that's pretty much all of the information on the Steam page. All this very steeped within the lore, but I do think the developers tried to put in a bunch of actual gameplay information within all of these lore entries. But then there's also a bunch of additional information on the official website for this game, and this stuff isn't kind of steeped in the lore like this Steam page was. This is just them trying to describe different elements of the game. So first off, we have story. A new deep story with an impactful narrative set in the atomic universe. The world stands on the brink of a new threat. A mysterious, giant, levitating structure known as the cube has become the epicenter of increasingly dangerous phenomena. And in order to save humanity, players must plunge deep into its secrets and survive. On the surface, it's a geometrically perfect object, and in truth, it's an anomalous, shifting place swarming with vicious enemies. But most terrifying of all is the equation hidden at the cube's core. Deciphering the equation can save humanity. Failing to do so means extinction. But beware, the cube can flip everything in an instant. As a world shifts, so do you. Now, what's also interesting here is that they're kind of teasing the middle of the cube. Pretty much everything we've talked about so far is this object of the cube and all of their biomes on it. But it is a big cube, so presumably there is something in the center. And that could be quite interesting, that maybe like their dungeons or their raids take you more into the center of the cube. It's hard to determine how big this thing actually is. Based upon what we've seen in the gameplay and kind of how it was presented, it seems pretty massive, almost like a floating continent or something. But then we have setting. Set in a uniquely designed world shaped as a massive levitating cube with constantly rotating rows and edges that create unexpected scenarios and combinations of environment as well as new combat challenges. And this is truly just one of the most interesting parts of this game. The fact that this cube has a bunch of different biomes all over it, and it'll keep shifting all of the different sections, meaning you could have like a snow biome touching right next to like a forest, and it just goes snow to forest right away. Or there could be like snow right next to a desert, and then it shifts again and puts a snow right next to water or an ocean or something like that. Just that possibility is really unique. And then we have world. Rich exploration of the massive world, vast expanses and diverse biomes to explore, filled with exciting quests and hidden secrets. Now, what's also really interesting is that on this cube, in some of the images we've seen, there seems to be like big lakes or maybe even oceans. There's a big ship in one of them. There's a bunch of different buildings at different parts that seem more like scientific domes or research domes. So I'm not exactly sure if humanity has gone on this cube and built on it before us players get into the game, or if this was stuff that was already here. But then we have progression. Deep and persistent progression, constant character development and customization that reward individual playstyles. Even failure won't halt player progression. I'm assuming because this game seems to be designed a bit more like an extraction shooter, that they keep kind of reiterating this to show that maybe you don't lose anything when you fail when you go on the cube. I'm not exactly sure. It could still be an extraction shooter, that they're just not calling that for some reason, and that you still get a bunch of progression even when you fail. Based upon everything we've seen, I don't think this is going to be a game like an extraction shooter where you lose everything when you die. Then we have combat. Intense combat and tactical depth. Dynamic battles with a wide choice of weapons and skills, deadly enemies, powerful bosses, and strategic preparation. It does also seem like there's a bunch of other RPG elements. We're going to have abilities. It seems like you're going to have more extraction shooter style weapon customization, but it also seems like you're going to have kind of the preparation phase that you could expect from an extraction shooter going into your expeditions onto the cube. So it could definitely be a unique unique mix of like RPG with kind of extraction shooter elements, just you don't lose anything like you would in an extraction shooter. Then we have technology, an innovative split rendering system that transforms how motion is handled in interactive environments. This proprietary technology powers the dynamic world of the cube, enabling seamless transitions, intelligent object tracking, and multiplayer synchronization. So this is basically just talking about the technology they're designing specifically for this game, because obviously it is a very unique premise of this constantly changing cube, and how if they don't do it right, it could be a very massive mess. I could see this game being incredibly buggy and broken if they don't nail down those aspects. But that's pretty much all the information we have so far on the cube. This is something that I am very excited for. I'm someone who plays a lot of looter shooters and a lot of extraction shooters, so whichever way it goes, I personally would be still really excited for it. But based upon everything we're hearing, it does seem to be more of an RPG, just maybe with some extraction shooter influences as well. I'm definitely wanting a new looter shooter, whether it's an MMO or not, that is constantly updated, that has a really robust and interesting endgame, and I think the looter shooter genre is kind of at a down point right now. I'm hoping sometime in the near future we get more information on the cube, because this really seems like a really unique take on an RPG shooter game. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.